last. Excellent. A warm welcome to our second of our lineup to the wonderful in-person event coming to us at the end of this month. I'm Peggy Hoffman. I am your facilitator leader for the event in Houston, but also just having a great time being here with you on your webinars. With me, of course, is Jennifer Steffen, and Carrie Mathis is who we will introduce. Not that she needs an introduction, but we're going to introduce her in just a moment. I'm going to be the warm-up act today. I'm not the full act. So you have an opportunity to hear from one of your own, which I'm super excited about. If you are not joining us in Houston, that is A-okay. We are delighted to have you. If you are joining us in Houston, you will find this conversation referred to while we're there. But in any case, there's a lot of content here, and it is good for every chapter leader. So I want to just start us off by for a moment focusing on Houston. So bear with me if you're not actually going to be there, but also take note so the person from your chapter who is going to be there knows exactly how to make sure they have the best possible in-person experience. The first thing is the conversation you have with your board before you ever get in the plane, train, or automobile. Make sure you come with an understanding of the agenda that your board is working with in the next year. Like, what are your top priorities? How will you track the progress? What are your areas for improvement? Now, you'll notice that these questions match the ones in the dashboard. So open up your dashboard, begin to familiarize yourself with the chapter dashboard if you haven't already. You won't get the whole thing filled out before you come. That's not the point. But there are a number of thoughtful questions that if the board could at least spend some time chatting or thinking about, will allow you to listen with more intentionality when you get there. Number 2, gather and bring key stats with you, because we're going to be building events and activities and ideas. And for you to be able to have this information to apply it or to use it to ask valuable questions is going to be awesome. And we're talking about stuff that you should already have that is required by the chapter dashboard, and in fact, part and parcel to the awards programs as well. So go ahead and bring that data. Do you have to have exact numbers? No, but have not a gut, but a really clear sense of that. And 3, this is going to be the toughest one to do. Mark on your calendar now to attend the Thursday kickoff on the first day. This is unusual. It's not a typical part of the academy, I understand, but it is games, and games. That's right. It's an opportunity for us to really get to know each other. So I really want you to make sure you know about it, and I want to make sure that it's on your calendar. Last, but certainly not least, do send in advance, or if you need to, bring your brag flyer. We're having the Hall of Fame, and it's going to be a hot competition. We already have 3 entries. That's right. All you need to do is to create a very, very simple one-page brief write-up that captures an activity or an initiative or something you excelled at that you'd like to brag. We're going to put them on display, do a little bit of voting, could be a contest, could be winners. Anyway, do you really want to be left out? I kind of didn't think so. You know what I'm saying? So let's go ahead and make sure that you have the opportunity to connect with that. I also want to make sure that you do not forget that this is not the final calendar, not the final webinar. We'll get the dates out to you. I somehow inadvertently left off that slide, but we've got 2 more webinars coming post, 2 more webinars coming post conference, and that's going to be based on what you tell us what content you want. So what I'd like to do now is get us started on today's conversation. But the first thing we have to do to get started on today's conversation is, of course, get you to weigh in. I'm going to launch a poll. It's a very simple question. The poll for you to take a look at right now is, how many years of service have you been in the leadership with your chapter? It's a single choice, less than 1, 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 4+. So how many years of service have you been in leadership with the chapter? And I'm going to go ahead and stop my share so our wonderful speaker has the opportunity to go ahead and put her slides up. The poll answers are coming in, and I'm getting a chance to catch up on chat, and I thank you very much for that. Very cool. Very good. So I love this. So Carrie, I am excited, very excited to share with you. It looks like we've got, oops, the popcorn is not quite over. I think we got it now. Let me share. This is great. We've got a couple of first timers in the room. Big round of applause. High five it. We love seeing you. We've got a bunch of folks here with some really solid experience, 4+ years, 3 to 4 years. Excellent, excellent. And a couple of folks that are right on this cusp of, yeah, already are no longer a newbie, but you still are a newbie, right? We always have things to learn. And the cool thing is that the wonderful, your grand leader, as well as a leader from Florida who has been in your seat, she at one point checked a box that said less than 1 year. She has certainly checked in the box 4+ years. She's going to share with you an incredible way to prepare your leaders for a successful year ahead. Let me ask you to put your hands together to welcome Carrie.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you so much for the introduction, Peggy. I really appreciate it. I'm super excited to be here today for 2 reasons. One, because anytime somebody asks me if I'd like to take part in an opportunity that I get to collaborate with Jen Steffen and Peggy Hoffman, I say yes. Love these ladies, and I'm always thrilled to be able to have an opportunity to collaborate with them and kind of share information with them. Both these ladies, I'm sure you guys would agree, are super, super, super passionate about our NIGP chapters. They want to see you successful. They want to help in any way that they can to support you in your journey throughout your chapters. And so this next part of the presentation really is kind of intended to tag along with that and thinking about concepts that will help support leaders along their chapter officer journey. So that's the second reason that I'm excited to be here today, is to share with you a concept about a leadership onboarding strategy that your chapter, if they haven't already, might want to think about implementing as part of your future programming. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started. One of the things I really would love to emphasize, you guys, I saw you are really active in the chat to start with, and that's great. This is really, I'd love to see the conversation continue to go. So we're going to have some opportunities for you to kind of chime in and weigh in, but please, throughout the conversation, throughout this presentation, if there's something that resonates with you, if there's something that's an aha moment, or like, this is really a great thing, please feel free to chime in on the chat. Because we'd love to have that interaction and seeing what resonates with you. So please feel free to be as interactive as possible throughout the entire presentation. So let's start by launching a poll question. I think Justin's going to assist with the poll question. The question is, has your chapter developed a structured leadership onboarding strategy? And you've got a couple options here that we're going to offer to you. Yes, a formal focused event is part of your program. Yes, but maybe it's informal. Maybe it's part of something that you do during a chapter business meeting or part of another event. No, we haven't done anything like this, or we haven't considered it, but it's definitely something that we might be interested in exploring in the future. So we'll give it about a minute or so, take a look at what those responses are coming in at, so we can get a feel for what you're currently doing out there or what you might aspire to do.
Carrie, and I threw you a loop. I also added another one in there that they integrated it specifically into a board meeting. So sorry about that.
Perfect. No, perfect. Thank you for that. It's always good to have options. And it looks like we have a pretty balanced, I mean, for the most part, we've got some folks that are currently doing it, which is awesome. Some are informal, maybe not as structured, right? Some of them do it as part of a board meeting, maybe an officer transition type of meeting where you're kind of passing the baton to somebody else and kind of giving them some information. We've got 16% that haven't done anything, and then we've got 36%, which is our highest percentage, that say they haven't considered it but are interested in the concept. So that's really great. That's what we're here today to just kind of share some information and maybe explore that opportunity for your chapter. And Peggy put in the chat to describe to us what you do. So again, please continue to provide details so that we can learn from others in the chat, as well as the presentation that we're going to move along with today. So what is an officer boot camp? When we think about that, and that officer boot camp title is just a phrase that was coined, and so you don't necessarily need to consider it necessarily a boot camp, but it's just the title that we came up with to call the leadership onboarding strategy. But an officer boot camp is structured, and I highlighted that structure because I want to emphasize intentional, right? It's structured in terms of our boot camp. It's a structured leadership onboarding strategy designed to provide chapter officers with the essential support and resources needed to understand and to be successful in their roles, right? Whichever role it is that they're playing, we want to make sure that they have a comprehensive onboarding to ensure their success. So liken that to an employee that you might have coming onto your staff. You want to give them some specific and structured onboarding to help them understand where the resources are and what level of support is available to them in order for them to be successful in their role. It focuses on equipping officers with the knowledge and tools necessary to lead effectively, right? So I want to reemphasize that again, that it focuses on equipping the officers with the knowledge and tools necessary to lead effectively and to achieve organizational goals. And I'm going to reemphasize this later on in the presentation, but one of the things that I wanted to share from the onset is, regardless of the size of your chapter, regardless of the maturity of your chapter, a concept such as an officer boot camp is a viable option for your officers to participate in, to ensure that they have the knowledge and tools available to lead effectively. And, you know, certainly some chapters are large and extra large and have a lot more complexity, but we've got some smaller and medium chapters that are doing great things, and they have great programs, and they have, you know, they have some governance identity things that need to be addressed with the officers coming in. So this is scalable. It doesn't matter the size of your chapter. What matters is being intentional and ensuring that we are supporting our officer leaders so that they're successful in their journey. So I'll just share with you briefly how our chapter got started. About 9 years ago, we began developing an officer boot camp initiative, because we realized that we did not have an intentional strategy to ensure that our officers were on the same page in terms of embarking on their leadership journey for our chapter. We realized that we didn't have a strategy to ensure that they were fully equipped for their roles, and that the volunteer leadership opportunity was equal to all officers. And so regardless of how much time they had spent in our chapter, we wanted to make sure that we were equitable to everyone that was coming in and stepping up for that amazing opportunity of serving as a volunteer leader in our chapter, and saying, how might we ensure that they are going to be successful in their roles? And so that's really the impetus of how the officer boot camp came around. Throughout the years, as officers transitioned, many had been informally mentored to the next, which is helpful, but from a macro level, we felt that we had a responsibility to build a structure to foster the team dynamic and prepare each officer for their upcoming term. And so again, this was initiated in 2016, so we're now in our 9th year. And as we go through the presentation today, I'm going to talk about some of the evolution, lessons learned, things that we've realized as a result of our journey in officer boot camp. So let's talk about what are the benefits, the why in this. Why would we want to do something like this? We certainly understand that we want to make sure that we're effectively equipping people, but what is the ROI to your chapter? What can we expect to receive back as a benefit of implementing a program of this nature? So we're creating an intentional, structured investment in your chapter's leaders. We want to make sure that from the onset, we're investing in their success for the chapter, because their success is our success. It's our success as past leaders. It's our success as a member. It's our success as perhaps some of your new folks that are coming into the chapter. If we are ensuring that our leadership is going to be successful, then it should transcend into our membership and their experience within our chapter being successful as well. We want to make sure that we're preparing them. And so really the upfront investment is going to pay dividends in terms of however long your term of officership is. If you are investing in a strategy up front to prepare them effectively, it's going to transcend through the duration of their officer term. And I think it sets a great tone for people that might aspire to be officers to say, wow, like they're really willing to invest to make sure that I'm successful. I'm not one person that just might be left to my own devices to kind of figure it out. We want to make sure that we are intentional. And we also want to make sure that we're establishing expectations for their leadership role. And that's an important thing because every role is different. Regardless of how many positions you have in your chapter officer structure, every role has separate and distinct responsibilities. And so getting out front of it, investing in the time to develop a structured onboarding and making sure that everybody understands the expectation for their specific leadership role is going to be beneficial in the long run. It's also an opportunity to build a team environment for your officers. So I know that some of our chapters are an entire state. Some have many chapters within a specific state. Some may have geographical boundaries that they're contending with. Regardless of where your officers are coming from geographically, this is a great opportunity at the onset of their officership term to engage in some team building exercises so that you can create that cohesiveness, so that they are learning about each other in kind of a safe space, a safe environment where they're free to ask questions, where they're free to collaborate and laugh and joke around and get to know each other in a safe space. We want to avoid assumptions of governance knowledge. So not everybody comes into the chapter with the same level of knowledge or experience when it comes to governance. Even if we've been participatory in perhaps another association and have familiarity with their government structure, does not mean that it transcends over into your specific chapter's governance structure. And so we want to avoid assumptions of what our officers might know or might not know about the concepts that they're going to need to know to run a meeting. So we want to just get out front of the assumptions and make sure that we're preparing them in a meaningful way. And again, talking about that safe space. So a safe space for open dialogue. Some of your officers may be more introverted than others who may be more extroverted, and that's okay. We want to create a safe environment for people to feel free to ask questions. There's no dumb questions. We want to make sure that they have an opportunity to communicate with each other and really learn about each other's communication styles. I think that's really important as part of that team cohesiveness as well. And so ensuring that we have that safe, open space for everybody to have conversation and learn together is really a huge benefit to having a program such as this. So I'd like to hear a little bit about you and your specific chapters in the chat. So our first question that we're going to ask is for you to tell us in chat, what is the length of your chapter officer's term of office? And so my understanding from listening to different chapters throughout the year is they have different terms. So we might have some chapters that are on a one-year cycle for each term of office. If you're vice president, if you're president, treasurer, secretary, what have you, we might have some that are on 2 years. Looks like we've got some coming in even up to 3 years. So we've got some variation in terms of all of our chapters that are participating in terms of the length of office. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we get into kind of the concepts of contemplating some of the officer boot camp programming considerations. So this is really helpful to know, Jen. It looks like there's a lot of variation. We've got one here that's got a 7-year progression. Fantastic. We've got people that also incorporated in a president-elect, past president. So we've got a lot of succession that's building into those chapter terms of office. We've got 5-year progression. So you see, we run the gamut here. And so not every chapter is the same, and that's wonderful. Whatever's working for your chapter is what works for your chapter, and you can absolutely scale this to consider your terms of office for your chapters. Need to determine what our term length will be, so keep them coming. Okay, so So for those of you that are still yet to communicate in chat, please do that, because we've got some folks in here that are, again, we're learning from each other. And just because your term of office is set at X right now doesn't mean that in the future you might not want to consider realigning that. So for those of you that are on 1 year that might want to consider a 2-year term or a 3-year term, kind of make note of those folks in chat that have a term structure of that nature, and you might want to reach out to them either here or if you're going to be at Chapter Academy, make note of those names so that you can have some one-on-one connections with them and talk about the benefits, or perhaps maybe some of the drawbacks that they might see with their current terms of office with their within their chapters. This is great information, lots of diversity. So our next chapter question that we're going to want to ask in chat is, what is your chapter's structure for line of succession? Are they required to go through every single chair and move up and ascend up into the role of chapter president? Or might there be an opportunity for you to have folks that come in and say, hey, I want to raise my hand, I want to be of service in the treasurer position, but I'm not interested in being secretary or vice president or president. So we have, some folks that have that kind of hierarchy ascension up to the chapter president. I'm interested to know if you have that, or if you just have, I can kind of raise my hand to be considered for one specific position and not have to go through all of the chairs. That's going to be another consideration when we think about structuring an officer boot camp, is thinking about your terms of office, but also your structure, because then we think about those roles and responsibilities. So some of you say, hey, we can come in for any position. You don't have to fill all of them. Some of them say you have an automatic ascension to the next. It looks like we've got a good split. Need at least 1 year as a board member to be considered. So that's kind of an eligibility requirement, right? To be eligible to raise your hand and say, I want to go into officer leadership. And many of you have no ascension. And so you think about those barriers to entry, and we're going to talk about a couple of those throughout this session. Many of you, it sounds like you don't have any sort of barrier to entry, that they can actually just go in and kind of do a one and done position and pop back out. They might choose to pursue some of those other officer positions as well, but it's not a requirement, it sounds like. We've got Camille that says we have it where you serve as secretary, then vice president, then president, each for 2 years. The treasurer also serves 2 years, but does not move up the chain. So they're kind of a separate and distinct position that's not in the line of succession. Great. Lots of different considerations and instructors that we have with our attendees today. Excellent. So let's dig into some of the considerations for establishing a program. And for those of you that had identified in the poll that you have a program, love to hear from you in chat as we're going through some of the program considerations. Are these things that you've contemplated? Might there be things in addition to what I'm identifying that have become part of your program? So let's talk about the parameters of the program. The first consideration is, do you want to establish it as a formal program? Are you formalizing this as a program that's within your chapter programming documents? Are you establishing a commitment of sorts to attend the officer boot camp, or whatever it is you might coin it as? I know several of you mentioned in the poll that it's informal, or we do it as part of a board meeting. And so those might be things like, well, we have a responsibility to mentor the person that's coming behind us in this role, but it's not necessarily kind of a formalized program. And that's okay too. I think anything is better than not having any sort of orientation. So I would suggest to you that if something is working well for you, to continue to do that, this is just another option that's more of a formalized program. And so I want to kind of talk to you about considerations for that level of programming. So if you establish it as a formal program, that means that you're committed to this program and you're committed to executing this program. Let's think about when we might want to convey attendance at the officer boot camp. Would you contemplate that you would want to get out in front of it and let anybody know that's raising their hands to say, I want to be considered for a chapter officer position, to convey to them at that time that, hey, we've got an officer boot camp. If you are successful in being elected to your chapter position, you will be expected to participate in this officer boot camp. Think about when you want to set the expectation for attending that. Or might you consider an opportunity where you might be conveying that expectation post-election, after they are elected? And there might be pros and cons to each of these. And perhaps there's lessons learned with these, right? So I have heard from some different chapters throughout the years that have contemplated trying to develop a program of this nature, but they weren't able to get buy-in from the officers. They weren't able to get buy-in from those folks that were actually raising their hand and saying, I want to be considered for this. So I would suggest that might be problematic from you. If your chapter is committed to establishing a program, then you definitely are going to need to consider when you want to convey the expectation. Is it optional? Is it not optional? I would suggest that if you are going to formalize a program and want to get that commitment, that it should be a requirement for service as an officer. Again, this is an investment in their success, right? And so I think it's all about how you frame things sometimes. I always tell my staff, they say, do I have to go to a meeting? And my response is, you don't have to go to the meeting, you get to go to the meeting, right? Because I think it's all about perspective. You get an opportunity to participate in this meeting. You get a seat at the table. And so if a candidate were to come to us and say, do I have to go to this officer boot camp? My response would be, you get to go to the officer boot camp, setting the expectation that it's intended to support their success. That you want to garner some excitement, that you want to say, we're investing in you. We are expending the time to invest in the success of you as a chapter officer. And so this is just a consideration of when you might want to set that expectation. Do you want to do it as your nominations are coming in and to say, hey, we're so glad we have your nomination. Just want to make you aware that if you're successful, we will be holding an officer boot camp to ensure that you are knowledgeable and have access to all of the resources to ensure your success. If you wait till post-election, you might have a little bit of a challenge to get that commitment. Let's think about the program frequency. So one of the reasons that I asked that question in chat was to kind of think about the structure. How many years is a term? Do they have lines of succession? And so you all had such great and unique answers. Not everybody is of the same mold when it comes to their chapter structure. And so this is a different consideration to think about. If for those of you that have a 5-year term, would you then consider maybe doing your boot camp every 5 years? And if your officers are in a line of success and where they're automatically moving up, but you've still got officers coming in and orienting perhaps in a 5-year period. So maybe your cycle would be every 5 years. But those of you that have a 1-year term, for those of you that say, hey, I can just have somebody pop in and be vice president and pop back out. Hey, I have somebody that can just pop in and be secretary and pop back out. Then the frequency of when you might hold your officer boot camp might be different, because you'll definitely want to catch those folks coming in, especially to make sure that from the onset, they have access, equal access. Same as if you have some returning officers that are still holding on to some positions. It's really critical to make sure that everybody has equal access to the same information, the same resources, the same support to ensure their success. And funding and format is another thing to consider. If you are going to hold the program, do you have funding to support some of the needs to stand up the program? And some might say, well, what kind of funding? How expensive is this? And I think it all really is going to depend on how you structure your officer boot camp. I will share with you that our officer boot camp costs less than $200, and we hold it every other year. So that's a fairly small investment for our chapter budget to support on a 2-year cycle, because our officers transition every 2 years. But for those of you that are annual or maybe 3 years, so a very small amount of funding. And again, that really depends on how big or how small you want to kind of go in terms of preparing for it. But it's things for you to think about, because you all do your budget cycle well in advance of your year. So if it's something that you're interested in implementing, maybe in your FY25 budget, think about having those conversations with your officers and your leadership this year. Is it a program that you maybe want to explore implementing next year? And if it is, then think about some funding to help support that particular opportunity so that you have that secured in your FY25 budget. So let's also talk about facilitation. And you may or may not want a facilitator of the boot camp. I would recommend considering a separate person to facilitate the boot camp. It could be some of your past leaders. It doesn't have to be. It could be subject matter experts. You could consider facilitators who possess enough wisdom to effectively facilitate the conversation and spark discussion, right? So it's important to get somebody that's proficient in facilitating discussion and make sure that they are able to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to speak, everybody's questions are being answered. Consider individuals or organizations that have a background in governance, because governance is likely going to be a strong area of focus for your boot camp, and ensure that they can articulate the nuances in an organized and informative manner. If you are going to consider some of your past leaders or prior volunteers, it's a great way to keep them engaged and to tap into their experience with chapter governance. But again, if you have access to someone who might be a facilitator, maybe even a chapter ambassador who is got strong facilitation skills, that might be another resource to consider coming in and helping to facilitate that boot camp. A challenge that I would foresee is if you have one of the officers that is participating in the boot camp also facilitating the boot camp, then their experience in this opportunity is going to be different, because likely they're more focused on making sure that the meeting is running in a specific manner and they're facilitating, and not necessarily being participatory as the other officers are. So just something to think about in terms of your process. So let's talk about some of the other meeting logistics that you might need to contend with. Think about scheduling. What's a good time of year that you would want to contemplate scheduling your boot camp? Would it be before the officers actually take the official oath of office and start their position? Would it be after they take their oath of office, when they might already be starting some of those programmatic responsibilities? Would it be something you might want to get out ahead of and do it maybe in the fall before they actually take on their role, so that they have sufficient time to review documents and go through this conversation? So might there be certain times of year that your folks are more busy with fiscal year ends or fiscal year starts, or you might have reverse trade shows or different programming that you're taking on? Like, what's an ideal type of schedule to be able to get this officer boot camp on? Might be a different question for all of us. If we're a calendar year cycle, or if we're on a different cycle, think about when you would want to hold that, and for what duration. And again, I think the duration would vary depending on the maturity of your chapter. So if you are a chapter that maybe is a small to medium, you might not require the length of time for the boot camp that a very extra large chapter is, that has so many programs that would need to go over in specificity. So it's all scalable. And it also depends on the commitment, again, of your officers. I wouldn't want you to run into a challenge with them saying, oh, well, I wasn't informed of how much time this was going to take, and I don't want to commit 4 hours to doing this boot camp. That's something you're probably going to want to consider while they're in nomination and their candidacy, rather than once they become an officer and then you have challenges with getting the harmony of the group. That's a critical thing. You could consider holding it in person, and that's my recommended approach from a team building perspective, but I wouldn't sleep on offering a hybrid approach. I think that that's a viable option for a couple reasons. One, because some of you are in chapters that, again, encompass an entire state, encompass an entire large geographic region, and it's just not really feasible for people to kind of get together without some extensive arrangements being made. And again, that might add to your cost. So if it's not feasible to contemplate that your folks might be able to get together with a fairly easy transit, then you might want to consider having a hybrid option, just to avoid any barriers to entry for somebody to participate. I'll share with you that we've had our boot camps as hybrid before, and one of the key things for those that are facilitating is to ensure that whoever is joining remotely, again, doesn't feel like they are excluded from any of the conversations. We want to make sure that they have great connectivity. We want to make sure that we're monitoring the chat. We want to make sure that we're pausing to make sure if they have any questions, right? It's easy for us to see somebody raising their hand in a physical room and being able to engage in the question and answer, but be mindful of those folks that are joining virtually to make sure that they have equal access and opportunity to engage in the conversation. And think about ways that we might be able to engage in team building despite the fact that we're not together all in a physical space. And so you might have some little fun exercises, things that, and I love Peggy's little intro question about, is the turtle naked or is he homeless? Because that's kind of a cute little fun thing, and everybody looks at it from a different perspective. But I think there's a lot of opportunities to engage in team building, even though we might not all be in the same physical space. And I would encourage you to consider some of those things if you are going to offer a hybrid opportunity for folks to participate. For those of you that might be in person, think about a centralized location, somewhere that's not too far east, not too far west, you know, depending on where your offices are located. You'll want to think about, if they're coming together in person, having a centralized location so it's not too onerous one way or another for people to transport into the location. And then again, just meeting logistics. Do you have a location? Might you use your government agency's location? If not, and you're going to rent a meeting room, then that's additional funding that you would need to have to support your meeting. Our chapter chooses to hold our officer boot camps at one of our officers' agencies, typically on a Saturday. Again, that's just a logistical thing to think about, is would you do it during the week or would you do it on a weekend? But a centralized location that you have access to, that might have all of the AV equipment that you would need if you're going to have some visual displays. And if you're holding it at one of your government agencies' locations, then hopefully there won't be a cost associated with that. We try to minimize the amount of funding that it's going to take to support this program. And so strategies like that of holding it within one of your agency's locations will help to mitigate against additional expenses for that. And think about meals and materials. I don't know if you guys can hear me, but my computer just bugged out. Can you guys still hear me over the phone?
Yep.
You're good.
Okay.
You're just
All right,
frozen
so
on the screen, but we can hear you.
Okay, my computer literally just shut down on me. So Jen or Peggy, I know, I don't know if you guys have access to the slide deck that you can kind of pull it up while my computer is rebooting, and I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I do. I'll bring it up, Carrie.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so let me continue on with the logistics, because that's the slide that we were on while I'm bringing back up my computer. Think about the meals. If you're going to do, you know, if it's just a couple-hour meeting, if it's a half-day meeting, if it's a full-day meeting, are you contemplating that you want to provide, you know, breakfast and lunch? If you choose to do that, then you want to make sure that you have sufficient funding to support those meals as well. Sorry, I'm just logging back in. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have funding to support that, as well as the materials that you might provide as part of the boot camp. And so we're going to talk about some tangible materials. You also have the ability to offer electronic materials, so that's, again, a lower cost. But depending on how much you want to scale this up, it might cause you, again, we do physical materials, and our cost is less than $200. So it really just depends on how much information you want to share physically versus electronically. And Peggy, if you can, or Peggy or Jen, whoever's driving, and if you guys can go to the next screen, and then just give me what the header is so I can speak to it, please.
Sure. So preparation, or do we just do that one? I'm trying to make sure I'm on the right one for you. Preparation.
So we were doing the
facilitator.
Yeah, we were doing the logistics.
Yeah. Yes, and so we're on preparation.
Preparation. Okay. It's important to consider that you are allowing your chapter enough time to adequately prepare for the day of, because this particular program is intended to ensure that we are giving proper support to our officers. We want to make sure that we are allowing ourselves proper time to prepare for that event. And so in the presentation, we're going to talk about some of the things that you might want to prepare. But for those that are the facilitators, for those that are going to be the organizers and the packaging of materials, I would recommend at least giving yourself 1 or 2 months to adequately prepare for the event. And so again, when you're thinking about your project timeline for planning and looking at dates and durations and locations, there's a lot of different factors that go into to planning this event. Liken it to if you have a reverse trade show, liken it to if you have a conference. There are a lot of different logistical nuances that you're going to want to contemplate as part of this. And so giving yourself sufficient time to adequately prepare is really important as well. So some of the things that will require preparation might be the actual materials that you're going to combine. So ideally, we'd like a central repository so that our officers have sufficient access to all of the materials that they might need to either access or utilize as part of their chapter term. If your term is a year, for whatever calendar cycle you're on, there are a lot of program documents likely that each of you have that support your chapter operations. And so you'll want to ensure that all of those are in a central repository for easy access for your facilitators. Consider if your facilitator is not somebody that's in your chapter currently, but you might have a chapter ambassador, or you might have someone that's proficient in facilitation or governance structures that you have coming in as an outside facilitator. They're likely want to have access to your documents so they can familiarize themselves with them in advance of the meeting. And if you're compiling them in a meaningful way that you're going to physically hand to somebody like a binder, and we're going to kind of talk about the binder in a little bit, that takes some time. Give yourself time to make sure that you are adequately preparing the resources that you're going to physically hand to someone. And even if you're going to compile those on an electronic or on a USB, a thumb drive to hand to somebody, or put a central repository on your website, that takes time to identify all of the specific documents, assemble them, and then to actually deliver them to the attendees of your boot camp. So I would recommend at least a couple months for preparation to ensure that they're adequately prepared and that they are familiar with their materials. I would also suggest that if you are getting together and having some structured conversations about different concepts that are within your boot camp, likely they might be preparing a slide deck to support the facilitation of the discussion. And so it might not just be the physical materials, but also a PowerPoint presentation that's going to actually guide the discussion throughout the course of your boot camp. And so that might take some time as well. I would suggest to you that likely what's in your physical document that you're handing to somebody is probably going to be a little bit different than some of the concepts that might be conveyed in a PowerPoint presentation. And so I think that's an important thing to consider. So again, recommending a couple months to adequately prepare for those and get everybody up to speed. Peggy, is there anything on the slide that I've missed?
I guess you sort of talked about this, but setting the tone.
Setting the tone. Okay. So again, I would go back to, this is an opportunity. This is not something I have to do. This is something I get to do, and we are investing in your success. I think anytime that you have an opportunity to convey to folks that are new to chapter leadership, that are coming in, they're going to bring new ideas, they're going to bring their own excitement, they're going to be in their own perspective. We want to make sure that we're harnessing this. We want to make sure that we are framing this up as an opportunity to help them be successful, not to look at it as, hey, we have to do this to check it off the list. Set the tone and actually, foster excitement for the folks that have the opportunity to be a participatory in your chapter boot camp. Not everybody in your membership is going to get this opportunity. And so I think that's something to be noted. I think it's something to be celebrated the day of when you get to your event, and really, promote that excitement and make sure that we're setting a tone that is conveying that we are invested in the success of their officer leadership journey.
I love all the points you've made. I just see a question that's sort of, I mean, it has to do, it's related to this whole process, but is, when do folks typically call for nominations and holding elections? Because so much of what you have mentioned here about the preparation should be in sync with that, which kind of gives people a little bit of thinking, whatever it is. So somebody's already come in and said, prior to our conference in October, just from your perspective, how did you all do a planning process? How did you sync with that, elections call for and then elections?
So I think that it's going to be different for every chapter,
Mhm.
but the officer boot camp is conveyed now to candidates. It didn't used to be, right? And so that's part of an evolution, but the expectation is now there. And the nominations for our chapter, and I'm interested in seeing some folks in chat that are putting this information up. I think that a lot of them occur, Peggy, in the fall timeframe for a January start.
Yep.
I see Jen kind of shaking her head, but if somebody has other, another time frame for which their nominations occur, that would be good to note here so we can take a look at some of those differences.
Right.
And so I would suggest that, Peggy, if those nominations are occurring in the late summer or fall, that's likely the time. So like we're in February now, right? So if those of you are going, hey, this sounds like a really great thing we want to explore and kind of build out, it's never too early to start. Like start thinking about it now, start having those conversations, start thinking about structure, start thinking about all those logistical things so that if you do want to deliver it, perhaps in November or December, or early January, as they start to come on to their officer leadership roles, that's a really great prime time to do it is perhaps in the fall, once those nominations have been accepted, again, to convey those commitments and things like that. It looks like a lot of them have nominations in the fall and elections in November
Yes.
with a January start. I think that's consistent with what our chapter is, but there might be some other ones. Yeah, it looks like where I'm seeing in the chat, it looks like a lot of them are November and they have a January start. So sounds like a lot of them are calendar year cycles for terms.
And
Yeah.
that's really, I mean, and I'm really glad that question was asked because you were able to make the point that, hey, start thinking about this now. Now I'm going to ask Jen, because we just had a question a few minutes before that about, when are you going to do more about this so we can really understand it? Because we know that this is an overview. And Jen, I'd just love for you to quickly jump in on that question.
Thank you. Thank you, because I'm chomping at the bit to talk about it because I didn't know if everybody saw this. So what Carrie's presenting today is a great overview, and for timing purposes, because I know most of you have your elections in November and officers take place in January. In July, Carrie and maybe some others and myself will be presenting this in depth with templates and resources, and going into a lot more detail about how you create this. So we'll be excited to spend a whole webinar session on that, and give you a lot of takeaways. We thought templates would be really great. So it's not as hard. You're not starting from scratch. So look for July that we're going to do an in-depth session on that.
And I'm glad we're able to say that. And part of the reason why, when Jen and I were talking about how do we use these pre-webinars and the post-webinars is when we're sitting in Houston at the end of the month, we're going to be talking about looking forward to the new year. And one of the things we want you to be able to say is, what are those new things we want to try in the new year? And so we wanted to give you some background, some information about this. But Carrie, two things, if I could just hold up two things real quickly that you said, I want to make sure people sort of maybe glammed onto. To set the tone. Part of this is if you do a very interactive boot camp like this, then they're going to understand that the board meetings are interactive and that we all have a role to play, right? So I totally love this notion of using this to set the tone, to get people primed and ready to work for this. But you also use the word celebration at some point, and in all of these things you really talked about getting impact. What if you took pictures at this and that became part of your promo on your next call for volunteers? Like, look, we support you from the very beginning. We have so much fun. When you put your name in in the election slate, and then you get the commitment, that they're with you from the very beginning. So I kind of like the way you've kind of presented all of this, because it makes a really cool point to all of that. Your next slide, actually, Carrie, is a question. So I'll ask it for you, and then maybe you could give us a little bit of thought around it while people are thinking about how to answer. And that is, what would have been helpful for you to know as you began your service as a chapter officer? So we just want to hear in chat, when you think about, and some of you are new, so I love it. some of you were only within 2 years. But what would have been helpful for you to know? Because that's the starting point of putting together the program. Carrie?
Yes, so I'm back on now, so I don't know if you can see me, but I'm back on so I can see the slides. So thank you, Peggy, and I'll just ask if you can keep up with the slides for me so I don't have to do that. But I think this is an opportunity in this chat question to be introspective. Put your empathy hat on and be introspective and think about day one as your service as a chapter leader, regardless of whether you've been in it for less than a year or I think more than 4 years, some of you said. Think back to that first day, think back to that first month, think back to those, those first couple months. What now would you say, wow, you know what, that really would have been good to know. That really would have been helpful for me to have a better understanding of. And your answer might be different depending on your chapter. So the things that might have resonated with me might be different in another chapter, but this is an opportunity to really get those wheels turning and think about what would have been helpful for you to know in advance. And so some of them say level of time commitment that's required for each office. And that's a really great thing that I would suggest perhaps nominees would want to know before they're ever even submitting their nomination to be committed is, what's the time commitment going to be? Not just for the term, but maybe even within the term, right? Like how much time every week am I going to need to be spending? How much time a month? What are my responsibilities? What are my roles? And I know in past chapter academies, there's been conversation about framing those things out, making sure that we have some good formalized documents that convey what everybody's role and responsibility is. And I'd say that's the best practice. I think that's really helpful information for people to know before they're committing. Some folks are saying procedures of when things need to be done in the position and how to do them, right? So we're looking for timelines. We're very organized people, right? I've been told that I'm a structuralist and I've embraced that concept of being a structuralist. Yes, I want to know all of that. I want to know the who, what, where, when. I want to make sure that everybody understands what they need to do, what's actionable and when. So I think any of those things are helpful. Sharing location to house documents. So again, that's that repository piece. Where can I find the information that I need to be successful? Where are these forms? Where are these documents? Where are our policies? How to use the website. I think that's another great thing, Jen, that you may kind of touch on later for those that have the chapter website. Calendar of events. So we're talking about timelines. We're talking about access to resources, aren't we? You guys are identifying things that would have been helpful for you to know that are fairly easy to include into a chapter boot camp program. So I love this. And again, if you have more than one, if you have 2 or 3 or 5 things, keep them coming because we can all learn from the things that you want to know about. There might be things that we want to infuse in ours that we hadn't contemplated that you're putting out there. So be empathetic and think about what would have helped you. We want to make sure that we're in turn providing that to those that are coming into our chapter leadership fold and providing that information to them as well. So great. I love this information. I love the feedback and that you guys are being so introspective.
Carrie, there was a question I want to go back to real quickly before you go on to your next slide, but also I have to give a shout out to Barbara's comment that one thing she wished she'd known were what other chapter members or mentors I can tap because no matter how much orientation we do for you, it's great to know when you get confused who you can reach out to. I love that. But there was a sort of I will call it a question about, sort of a how-to question a little bit, but the question, and it was also from Barbara was, do you have a separate committee that does this or is it part of an existing committee or is it ad hoc? So in other words, there is a planning component of it. Just if you can give a sense in your example, who's doing it and then maybe,
Yep, great question, Barb. In our chapter, I will share with you that some of the past presidents, again, that had identified, that we have an opportunity to perhaps ensure that we're adequately preparing folks. Some of our chapter past presidents jumped in and said, I'm willing to take this on and develop this program. But I understand that not every chapter past president might have the time, the capacity, the desire, the ability to kind of expend to deliver this program. So that's why I kind of offered that It doesn't necessarily have to be someone that was a past leader. It could be somebody that's like a chapter ambassador. It could be somebody that's skilled in facilitation. It's not a separate committee, but that doesn't mean that it can't be. That absolutely is another volunteer opportunity that you guys might want to put together. You know, especially when you think about succession and you think about building the program. Maybe it shouldn't necessarily be the same people that are responsible to do it all the time, because those people are going to retire at some point, right? So you want to have some people that are going to be able to pick it up and kind of carry it along and make it greater than they found it. And so, you know, your chapter might want to consider, if you're going to implement a program of this nature, that you might want to create a committee and say, look, you know, let's open it up. Let's be innovative. Let's brainstorm. What are the things that we can bring to the table to help support it? And you can make those into volunteer opportunities. And one thing I'll also share with you is this particular program we're talking about today is for officers, but that doesn't mean that it can't transcend into your committee structure. And so that's one of the things that our chapter is embarking on literally this year, is we're going to hold a committee boot camp, right? Like, because committees have responsibilities and they have roles and they have, you know, we want to make sure they're set up for success too. It shouldn't just be, you know, the officers that are kind of running things from that operational perspective. But we have a large number of volunteers that participate on committees. Are we adequately preparing them to be successful and excited and energized and supported? Like, it could transcend to all of your different volunteer opportunities. It's not just unique to specifically to officers. So I think we've done it enough to know, you know, we've got a pretty good model at the officer level. Let's now take it to the next level and make sure that our chapter committee members and chairs are sufficiently supported with access to all of the documents and resources and mentorship that they need to be successful.
And I would imagine, I love hearing, obviously, that you're going to do this for the committees. I can imagine that once you get that one up and running, it could change what you do for your officers' boot camps, because they're going to be coming into the officer boot camp in some cases, right? With that whole, with a different experience. So it's really neat. It's really about evolving your whole approach to how do you engage members in the work of the association. Very cool. Would you like me to move on?
I think it's also, yeah, I think it's also a level of succession planning, Peggy. So like, if we're doing this thing at the committee level and educating and helping them, and that they know that we're also doing that for the officers, they might be inspired and say, you know what, I feel really supported at the committee level. I'm thriving as a chair. I'm really enjoying this. And I know that they have the same program at the officer level. Like, that might be enticing to somebody to say, you know what, I'm willing to step up because I know that I'm going to be adequately supported.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, so now here's where the rubber meets the road. We're going to talk about what's in your binder. I have a copy of a binder right here, but what I'm going to suggest to you before we get into what's in the binder, because I'm really not going to go into detail today on what's specifically in the binder. This is intended to, again, be introspective to your chapter. What's in my binder might not be relevant to your chapter. It might only be partial relevant to your chapter. And so think about this again. I'm going to reemphasize that it's scalable depending on the size of your chapter, depending on the programs, depending on the things that you have to offer. It's scalable. So just because you see over to the right that there's a large number of tabs in the table of contents doesn't mean that that has to be what yours looks like. It needs to, your binder, your document repository should represent what's relevant to your chapter specifically. It's likely not going to mirror what my chapter specifically has, and perhaps it shouldn't. It's all about what's relevant. So when you think about going through a planning process to prepare for some of these, to prepare for events of this nature, I would encourage you to spend a lot of time on thinking about what's relevant. What's new? Did you bring some new programs in last year? Have you also sunset some programs that maybe haven't been working or are obsolete now? What's critical for you to ensure that your officers know about? And allow them an opportunity to have access to those documents, and that they are coming prepared, and that they have the ability to ask questions and make sure that they're informed of these things. So I would suggest to you that, and I could bring this binder with me to Chapter Academy. I'm planning to come next week. I'm happy to bring this as an example. We'll put it on the table, but please just recognize that it's an example only. This is not perfect by any means, but it represents what our chapter finds to be relevant, finds to be current, finds to be critical. But again, it's going to be different for each one of your chapters, depending on your maturity and what you have to offer. And I would also just kind of point out that when you see this graphic over here, this is the inside of what our binder looks like. This is what somebody gets when they come to Officer Boot Camp. You'll notice that they're getting a hard copy binder with materials. They're also getting a flash drive. And again, we tried to make it fun and we themed it. So they're getting a dog tag flash drive because it's a boot camp. And so those are just kind of some little fun kind of nuances that you can do, again, to kind of be celebratory, to have that excitement and kind of theme things. But you'll also notice that on the left-hand side in a pocket, there's a handout with note pages. That's the actual PowerPoint presentation that was developed to help facilitate the discussion and to guide us through the boot camp. So again, make sure that you're providing sufficient time to develop any resources that you're going to deliver as part of the boot camp opportunity. Okay. Next slide, Peggy. All right. So this is probably one of the most critical things to identify as a best practice when you're going to be thinking through a boot camp strategy. It's all about chapter governance. And those chapter governance documents are going to be different for every single chapter. So again, I can't really emphasize that enough, that we might have a model, but it's not necessarily the template, right? We're going to be looking to July and we're going to be providing you some templates, but be introspective and think about what's specifically important to your chapter. Likely most of us all have chapter bylaws. I believe that's a requirement of being in the affiliation agreement with NIGP. You might have standard operating procedures and you might not. I think some of you in chat said it would have been nice to know the standard operating procedures. It would have been nice to know how I can access policies. Some of you may have a strategic plan and others may not. So again, that's another example of how it's scalable. But if you do have a strategic plan, wouldn't your chapter officers need to know what it is, right? How are they going to meet those objectives? How are they going to be working towards implementation of some of those strategies without having access to the plan? If you have a code of conduct, make sure that all of those things, those expectations, those governing documents are included in whatever you're providing to your officers. And again, when we talk about avoiding assumptions, this is something that we learned through our boot camp is not everybody knows how to facilitate a meeting. Not everybody knows how to develop an agenda. It's true. Like you know, we run into these roles as chapter officers, and then some of us have to kind of figure it out, right? Like who do I ask? Who do I ask how to facilitate a vote? And so these are part of the things here that we realized once we got into chapter boot camp, that some of our officers raised their hands and say, can we just spend some time talking about the voting process? Am I allowed as the president to make the nomination, or do I need to call for a motion from the floor? How do I facilitate that? Motion, second, discussion, vote. Not everybody knows that. And so I think, like, let's suspend assumptions. Let's make sure we suspend all assumptions when we're going into these trainings. We are walking in as if people, again, safe space, right? We're not going to judge somebody because they don't know how to facilitate a vote. None of us all knew how to facilitate a vote at one time either. And so we are just there to provide guidance to ensure that they are adequately prepared to walk into that meeting with an agenda and understand what the protocols are for running the meeting. Think about the perception of your members walking into a chapter meeting. If it appears to be unorganized, if it appears to be unscripted, if it appears to be haphazard, if it appears like everybody's not all on the same page, can we expect that those chapter members are going to come back? Can we expect that those chapter members are going to want to renew their membership? And the answer might be no. Let's have a level of professionalism with our chapter meetings, with our chapter business meetings, and make sure that those that are running the meetings are sufficiently prepared so that we don't have a perception of unpreparedness, of haphazard, of, wow, I don't know if I want to be a part of that, right? And so I offer to you that the chapter governance, whatever your governance documents are, and think about those processes and procedures that dictate how your meetings are run. Make sure that you're expending however much time is needed to ensure that everybody is aware of how these things align with your operations, and make sure that they understand the facilitation process for each.
And can I just make an observation? This also gives you an opportunity, right, to question, are all the things we're doing the right things, or where do we change things up? And I don't mean to put too much muddiness in the water, but I love the opportunity that you can say, but what if the president, if there isn't a caveat of how to handle a meeting without a president? Well, what if the president can't make it? Oh, now we have a chance to talk about what that means. That's really cool.
That's right. It's setting expectations, right? If the president can't be there, who's the next person that's responsible? Like, how do we deal with quorum? Like, not everybody knows about quorum or how to deal with quorum. So, like, all of those things are things that need to be discussed, and make sure that everybody has an understanding of how those work, right? Because you don't want to be caught off guard. Chapter boot camp, officer boot camp is intended to ensure that nobody's caught off guard, whatever that looks like for your organization, for your chapter. And so let's talk about some of the actual documents that you might want to include in your table of contents. So you saw a screenshot of our table of contents. I was deliberate to not make it too clear because, again, I want everybody to focus on what would be relevant for their table of contents, not our table of contents. But I'm going to give you an overview of some things to kind of contemplate. And again, when we get into that July webinar, we're going to some templates so that you might have some good guides to use. But think about those governing documents again, what your bylaws are, what your policies and procedures documents are. If you have a strategic plan, include that. Think about your budget document, right? For those officers that are coming in, they may not have been part of the preparation of the New Year's budget. So you want to provide those budget documents so they understand that. I think somebody in the chat earlier said one of the things they would have liked to known is having access to the tax documents, right? So some of those historical legacy documents would be helpful depending on what position you're in. If you have specific forms, if you have specific internal forms for reimbursements, for things that you put out at your chapter meetings, include the templates of your forms in there as well so everybody has access. Your NIGP affiliation agreement for your chapter, that should be something that is passed along as your officers change hands so they understand what those requirements are for being an affiliate of NIGP. Don't allow those documents to just be historical somewhere in an archive. Make sure that they carry forward to your current officer leadership. If you have specific program documents, maybe for your reverse trade show, if you've kind of framed that out into program documents so that you have those planning documents, maybe those of you that hold conferences or semi-annual conferences, any sort of program documents that you think would be helpful from an informational perspective. It doesn't mean that the officers are going to be the ones that are implementing these programs or handling all those programs, but for situational awareness, so they have an awareness of every great thing that your chapter is working through on an annual basis, provide them access to that information. And for those of you that are structuralists, like me, key dates. What are some of the key dates? They might be your business meeting dates. They might be your conference dates. They might be your event dates. They might also be dates for required documents to be submitted to NIGP. And so again, suspending assumption, we can't assume that everybody knows what those are. So any information that you can gather, assemble, and provide as part of this boot camp is going to be helpful for them from an awareness perspective. If some of those key dates are tied to,
No, go ahead, go on. I just wanted to add something when you're done.
If some of those key dates are tied to actionable timelines, for instance, if I'm the vice president and I have a responsibility to provide, to prepare the dates for our chapter meetings and secure those speakers, how far in advance do I need to secure the speakers so that we can market it appropriately, right? Like, so think about those actionable items by position and what timelines are associated with those. I've always been a fan of again, we're setting expectations. Any sort of opportunity you can to build out actions by position and timelines is just helpful to keep people on track and to talk through those. If somebody's challenged with a health issue or something that came up at work and they just can't do it, then they have an opportunity to converse with their fellow officers and say, look, when I'm phoning a friend, I need some help. I know this timeline's coming up, but I'm unable to produce it because I have these factors going on. Can somebody jump in and help me? I feel like giving people all of this information up front is really going to help them to ask for support if needed, but also to be support if somebody else needs support. And then also legacy documents, like some of those tax documents, maybe your charter, any of that old information, perhaps your old bylaws, things that have evolved over time. They don't necessarily need to be accessing those on the regular, but having the ability to know where to get those legacy documents is also helpful as well. Jen?
Yeah, Carrie, just one thing I wanted to, because I can see other people, because I know I'm seeing this as I'm sitting here. This seems like a daunting task to begin with. And I think what I would say to everybody is yes, the first time you put it together is going to be the hardest. It's then going to be
Yeah.
easier year after year because then you're just updating, removing old documents or new ones. So anybody that's thinking about this, it is probably a lot of time to do for the first time. It can be scalable, as Carrie has said, to your chapter, but it's going to be just that initial first time. And then it's going to be so much easier as a legacy to the rest of the leaders to just add updates each year to it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Jen, and it also might lend itself to the strategy of developing a committee, right? So that people can divide and conquer, and we can say, okay, committee members, I need somebody to pull the budget documents and the forms. I need somebody to pull the program documents. I need somebody to pull the bylaws. Let's put them in a central repository so we can work from there. So I think it might make it less intense the first time if you have multiple people that are contributing to the compilation of those documents. Okay. Next slide, Peggy. Okay, so roles and responsibilities is another key area that I would recommend that you spend sufficient time addressing during the boot camp for a couple different reasons. For those of you that don't have the roles and responsibilities outlined like you see on the screen, I would highly recommend that you do so. I think from an expectation perspective, it's important to have those out there. I think Jen and Peggy, I've heard for years in these chapter academies and things like that, that it's important to ensure that everybody is informed of what their responsibility is. These are just an example. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to go with these. But I think in terms of people, if you're trying to encourage and recruit people to step up and serve as an officer, one of the questions I would have is, what's the commitment? What are my responsibilities if I'm going to step in and serve as vice president? What do you expect of me? How do I execute? If you don't have that defined, I'm not sure that I can make a good decision to raise my hand and say, sure, I'll go ahead and do that. So I would encourage you, if you haven't built out your roles and responsibilities, to take time to do that. And you'll note that under the transitional requirements for each of these, the very first bullet is attend the new officer orientation program. So again, that's setting that expectation that I talked about earlier, right? That if you are going to aspire to and raise your hand to be nominated, it's an expectation, it's not optional. It is not optional for you to attend. You will attend this officer orientation meeting so that we can ensure that we are adequately preparing you to be successful. So I would also encourage you to put that into your transitional requirements. And again, you'll see mentorship there, Peggy. I think that's one of the things that somebody talked about earlier was mentoring, and who do I reach out to, right? Who do I reach out to that can help me, that served in this role before? So that's an expectation. So when our treasurer transitions to a new treasurer, the outgoing treasurer is responsible to mentor their successive treasurer. So that's kind of that connectivity of points of contact. But these are just examples, not necessarily that you have to follow these, but the point being to establish the expectation of attendance at the orientation meeting so that they have an awareness that this is a requirement, whether it's in person or virtual. They're required to attend to ensure that we're setting them up for success. Next slide. All right, so here's another chat question. If you can participate, please. What is a unique aspect of your chapter that would be helpful to introduce in the orientation of your officers? What would you put in your binder? What would you put in there to make sure that they are sufficiently prepared for their service? It might be some of the things that I highlighted in the previous slide, like your policy documents, your program documents. But if there's something unique to your chapter that you think would be helpful, this is an opportunity for you to kind of brainstorm and think about what those things might be. And any of the information that's provided in the chat, I saw somebody that asked Jen for a transcript of the chat, and I think it's because there's so many great ideas that are being thrown out there, which is fantastic. They want to capture those, and they might say, wow, you know what, I hadn't considered that. I want to make sure that we're including that in. So please feel free to put in the chat if you can think of some unique things that would be helpful to include as part of your officer's orientation. So Stephanie says, I wish my chapter had anything that could help somebody move forward, right? And so that's, Stephanie, we call that an opportunity. We call that an opportunity. We got to start somewhere, but let's just start, right? And this is something that can evolve. You can build on it over time. I think the point is, like, let's just talk about a concept where we can make sure that we're supporting each other. Even if we start small, let's just start. Ginny says roles and responsibilities and SLAs for response times, especially for our committees, right? So we're like, you know, we want to have the expectation that people are being responsive, that they don't just know what the task is, but when does it need to be done? And what's the communication protocols? That's a great observation. Expectation and requirement. Write-up of how event works and what officers and responsibilities are for that event. So then we're kind of getting into some of those programmatic aspects of it, of can we build it out and make sure we understand how this program works and what are all of the tasks that we need to do to ensure its success. Great observations. Thanks for sharing those.
Didn't mean to switch the slide.
No, you're good. You're good, Peggy.
I saw somebody
Yep.
mention that their, you know, some of their each of their officers tends to have some secret or silent aspects, things that aren't in the job descriptions. And what's kind of interesting about that is sometimes that's part of the team norm, right? How the board has started operating. And you don't always get the norms in the job descriptions, nor do they necessarily need to be there. But that would be a great thing to happen at the orientation, is to talk about those norms, because then it allows people to sort of have a sense of extra time. I mean, I didn't mean to take a minute. I know we only have about 14 minutes left, but so let me change the slide for you.
Yeah, and I think, Donna, for your comment about those, you know, consider some of your program documents evolve over time, and so if some of those responsibilities and those roles should not be invisible but be visible for people that might be assuming that role in the future, take the time to update those documents, right? We have a lot of living documents in our chapters, and so we need to be intentional about making sure that they're maintained as accurately as possible. This is always an area that we go over in Officer Bootcamp. Is while most of our folks are NIGP members, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are informed of all of the amazing chapter resources that NIGP has to offer. There's a completely unique section on the NIGP website dedicated to chapters, where it houses a ton of this stuff and then some. Like I only captured a small portion of it here, but I think it's important just to recognize that while we might be NIGP members, again, avoiding those assumptions, not everybody necessarily has been into the chapter resource portion of NIGP's website. And so I would recommend expending some time during your boot camp to go through some of those resources so that they understand, in addition to what your resources are to help them be successful, NIGP has a ton of resources to ensure that they are successful as well. And you might want to just go into the website and kind of show some navigation and show all of those things. I always talk about Jen Steffen in our boot camp. I avoided putting her picture on here because she's not a fan of it, but we always want everybody to know who Jen is, right? We don't want to assume that our officers coming in know Jen, know the amazing resource she can be, how to contact her. Make sure that they understand the resources that are available within the chapter, but also from NIGP itself. There's just a wealth of information located on the website. So I'd encourage you to ensure that everybody's informed on how to access it and who to contact if they have questions. Jen, is there anything that you want to share in terms of that slide? I know I only took kind of a snippet of the resources. Is there anything specific that you wanted to point out for the chapter officers?
No, I think the other big thing, and it's visually on there, and that's our area ambassadors that play such a critical role of being a support, not just somebody who can come out and make a presentation on NIGP, but really come with, you know, all of our ambassadors have been in your shoes. They have been chapter leaders or currently are. So certainly can understand and help navigate any of those questions and things that come up as a chapter struggle or a question.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, Peggy? So in addition to the chapter resources that NIGP has to offer, expose your officers to the resources that you have to offer in your chapter. Think about how you communicate with your members and ensure that they understand all of those communication tools that are at their fingertips. And so I've kind of displayed some here from some of the great chapters of NIGP. It could be your newsletters. How often are your newsletters published? Who's responsible to do that? Is there a requirement for your officers to be including articles in there? Like, kind of talk about, you know, what their role and responsibility is in terms of providing communication to the members. If you have a chapter website, who's updating the website and what sort of information is on there? and also your social media platforms. Some of you are doing some really great and amazing things out there on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram. I see them, I follow them. I love to read what you guys are all doing, but encourage your officers to be part of the conversation quite literally. Encourage them to submit articles in the newsletter. Encourage them to like, share, and comment on some of those social media posts. Consider that the officers are influencers of sort for your chapter, and so you'll want them to be as engaged as possible in all of these communication tools that your chapter has to offer. Next slide, Peggy. All right, so we're going to wrap it up strong here. Just kind of reemphasizing the need for open dialogue. We want to build in sufficient time to have the Q&A. Don't let that be a shortcoming that you're just feeding them information. It can be overwhelming. It's a lot of information. There's going to be a lot of discussion, but make sure that you have sufficient time for that open dialogue to make sure that people have the opportunity to speak and get their questions answered. That's the whole reason that we're doing a boot camp, is to make sure that people are informed. Again, think about your facilitator, that they're skilled and prepared to spark discussion. If you find a quiet time where people aren't necessarily engaged, maybe they kind of have some key concepts they can bring up to facilitate some discussion. And make sure that you are building the team cohesiveness, so allowing everybody to engage together in some collaborative discussions about maybe some strategies, maybe some observations, maybe some new and exciting things, that new ideas that they might have for your chapter. Make sure that you're allowing that safe space for that open dialogue. Next slide, Peggy. All right, this is my favorite slide. I know a lot of you guys that are on this presentation today, and I know how creative you are, and Peggy loves to talk about doing fun things and being creative. So don't miss out on the opportunity to get creative and spark some excitement for your attendees. And again, it can be simple things like theming. We took the boot camp thing quite literally and took kind of like that military theme and created everything with a theme of that camouflage. And we gave them a dog tag USB drive. Things like that, I think, kind of set a fun tone for the day, so that they're not walking in going, oh God, I'm going to get inundated, I have to sit through this meeting. Make it fun and exciting. Everybody got a shirt, everybody got their materials, it was kind of packaged, and again, it's low cost. And so think of ways that you might be able to package your information so that it builds the excitement the day of as well. Next slide, Peggy. Make sure that we're effectively communicating. So that begins with when the commitment of the expectation is established. So if you guys are thinking about, launching one of these in FY25 or later this year, think about when you are going to start communicating about this opportunity, and I say opportunity. Think about your save the date messaging to build that anticipation. Again, this is excitement, this is to be celebrated, this is an opportunity, not something I have to go to, I get to go to this. And so make sure that we are developing a good communication strategy to build that excitement up until the day of. And it's okay to give homework, you guys. Provide the critical documents in advance to allow them sufficient time to review them and come prepared. They might be developing questions as they're reviewing the materials, and that's okay. Some of your bylaws might be lengthy, some of your program documents might be lengthy, your strategic plan. So providing that information in advance and allowing them the opportunity to review and come prepared is always something that I would recommend. All right, and so this is an example of our communication strategy. This is an email that we launched, again, with some of that homework, if you will. We provided them our policies, our bylaws, our strategic plan. We said, hey, we're looking forward to be seeing you. Here's the date. Here's where it will be held. Plan to arrive by this date. Here's when we're going to start. Here's our agenda. We're going to provide food. Here's a link with a map to get to the location. All of the pertinent information you'll want to make sure that you're conveying to them in advance so that you are, again, adequately preparing them for the day of and building that excitement. Next slide, Peggy. All right, so let's talk about what's next, and I want to make sure we have time to get to this.
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes.
Okay. All right, we can do this. Next slide, Peggy. All right, Post-action, once the boot camp's done, your work is not done. We want to make sure that we are, again, kind of circling back and kind of closing the loop on the day's event. So our chapter, and again, we'll be glad to template this out. We require all of the officers to sign an acknowledgement of duties form so that they are affirming the position that they are going to be assuming, they have no conflicts of interest, and that they have the appropriate documents to help them prepare for success. Again, we're happy to template that out for you. We give them certificates of participation, so they actually have something tangible to say, I completed boot camp. We take a lot of pictures, kind of to Peggy's point. You know, you might want to put those in a newsletter or mark it for the next one. You know, it's an opportunity to take photos, and I know a lot of you guys are into that because I see you posting all the time. So don't miss out on an opportunity to kind of document those events. Launch a survey. And again, that's something that we'll be glad to template for you, but get their feedback. How did they perceive the event to be? Do they feel like the logistics were good? Was the outline good? Was there information they would have liked to have known but didn't know? Like, this is going to be a work in progress. Take that feedback and adjust for your future events. This is a critical thing. You don't want to assume that that everything was addressed that they would have liked to see addressed. So get that feedback and incorporate it into your future boot camp. Next slide. Quickly, the evolution we've learned over the years, and we've evolved our program. And so we formalized, again, the attendance, like you saw on the roles and responsibilities document. We formalized that to make sure that we were conveying the commitment. We added content as the program offers expanded, so our table of contents grew. We adjusted the format based on participants' feedback. So again, we took that feedback and we said, you know what, how can we make this better? Based on their feedback, we optimized some things. And to ensure that participants are equally informed and prepared for their leadership journey. That's the whole purpose of this, right? So like, take that information and develop your program and build it out and make it stronger for the next time. And next slide, wrap up, one more. All right, key principles. We're doing a comprehensive orientation to make sure that they are aware, informed, and have access to all of the resources to help them be successful. We're opening the clear lines of communication. They know the who, what, where, and when. They know how to coordinate with each other, and they have resources to help them be supportive along the way. We are giving them access to resources, if it's hard copy, if it's electronic copy, however it is, we just want to make sure that they have access to all of the resources to ensure their success. And we're providing that support network to say, we're here, we're in it with you, we want you to be successful, reach out to us if you need any additional support. We have role-specific training, so that's one of the keys is, here's your role, make sure that you are successfully executing your role, let the other person execute their role, and don't blend that if you're transitioning in succession from one role to another. That's definitely something we want to reemphasize. Let go of your past role, embrace your new role, and go forward and execute. And then nurturing that cohesiveness amongst the team. They're going to be in it for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years maybe. We want to make sure that we're setting the tone for a cohesive and collaborative environment for our officers. Next slide, Peggy. All right. That's it in a nutshell. I wrapped up with 3 minutes left. This is my contact information. If you guys have any additional questions leading up to the July webinar that Jen and I will be doing, I am, again, the chair of the NIDP Governing Board, but I'm also a boot camp survivor, so been through it myself. I facilitated it. If you have any questions about the concept or any of the nuances, please feel free to shoot me an email. I'd love to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Oh my gosh, what a fabulous conversation. Obviously you're getting lots of applause, Carrie, and I love the fact that this is just an orientation and that obviously there's going to be a lot of people attending the in-depth in July. So excellent. As Carrie said, I just want to mention just real quickly, she is going to bring that sample to the binder. It will be there for you to be able to take a look at it. So by all means, if you're going to be there in person, you have an opportunity maybe to buy her a drink at the bar. I mean, I don't know. I'm just putting some things out there. Okay. But thank you. You've given us a wonderful period of time. We got about a minute and a half. If there are any quick questions, otherwise we're going to let you go. I saw several of you have hard stops. You got to move it. I get it. No problem. Thank you for spending so much time with us. We knew that you would love it. Carrie, can I just big round of applause? Thank you, because you have put so much time into helping to share this knowledge and this experience and what a difference it makes.
Peggy, can I wrap with just one thing too? Carrie, yes,
Please.
thank you so much. There was lots of things going through the chat. Within the next day or two, I will have the slide deck, the recording. I'm going to do all the raw chat for you. It will be there for you to see all of that. That'll all get posted on the website, and I'll send a group email to everybody where to find it because things will be too large. So we'll have all of that there. Also, there was a question about the cheat sheet for Robert's rules. Michelle sent that to me. I'll add that on that landing page as well. So you'll have lots of resources. And then as soon as Carrie and I nail down our date for probably mid-July, we'll send out invitations. I'm going to send them out to the entire boards of our chapters to attend a much more in-depth with templates and things that you can download. We'll have a whole webpage for it.
Yep. And I'll be at Chapter Academy. I'll be at Leadership Summit. So feel free to stop me. Let's have a conversation. If you have questions, if you want to continue the conversation, happy to engage with you at Chapter Academy.
Thank you, Carrie, so much. Thanks, guys. See a lot of you soon.
Yeah. There's a question, a private question to me, Jennifer, someone with a hotel. I'm going to tell them to contact you and you
Yes,
will
please.
get them in the right place.
Yep, please.
So the person, in case I don't get, contact Jen.
Please, yes, if there's any issues with somebody having reservations or needing a reservation or the hotel, please just email me directly, jstefan@nigp.org, please.
Excellent.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you.